Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we've got a bit of history, and very important history which ties into the present. It is one of the shows that has quite a lot of information, and of course we put out shows which are a series of statements which help to understand things, or help me and you understand things, and they're in the archive under titles such as the Protocols of Power. And we do shows on the history of where we are now, and this is recent history we're going to be talking about tonight. Lose your mind, Earth is in their hands. In their hands, of course, was the motto, the logo for the 1992 Earth Summit. It was a picture of the Earth in a hand, and we're going to be referring to the video by George Hunt, which is UNCED, the Elite Plan Well Ahead, and you can find that in the Fourth World. If you go to windowsontheworld.net, you can find a whole show about that, a live show called the Fourth World. You can also find a full article of everything that we're going to be talking about, apart from the information which is in this show tonight, because this is an add-on to that information. The information in that article can be found in The Man Who Saw the Future. So there was a phrase coined after the 1987 World Wilderness Congress, which has recently been disappeared from the internet. You probably don't know what it is. It used to come at the top of searches with a description of exactly what it meant. That term was the lostness of the mind, not the lostness, the lostness. It's recently been disappeared from the internet, coinciding with one of our shows when we actually talked about it. I actually went to look for it because it used to be there about a year ago or less. Haven't looked for it for a while, but when I actually looked for it recently, gone, pulled from the internet, and somebody in our Discord group actually found a reference to it having been taken off the internet because there had been too many people looking for it. I'll actually put that into an article, and when I post this on YouTube, and it'll go straight to Odyssey, I'm going to use that as the thumbnail, so it'll be on there. But very, very curious as to why that happened. So, the lostness of the mind, it described a mindset that has now become commonplace. Remember, all of this was predicted. A borderless wilderness of the mind, a mindset where there is no central belief system, just a mixture of ideologies based on fake neo-paganism and earth religion, which is in effect run by global finance. And it is just a front for corporate looting and the favoured corporations who run it all. We can see that in everything. We don't even have to scratch the surface to see that global corporations are running pretty much everything. It is a war of infiltration and integration. It depended on the repetition of phrases and worthy sounding names, and we're going to be getting into all of that in tonight's show. The repetition of phrases and concepts which actually mean nothing but sound very worthy. They mean the opposite of what the public actually think they mean, and of course the public repeat them innocently all the time, and your local officials in the town hall, the people who you vote for, and your MPs all use the same word salad, which they have no idea of its true meaning. And if they have, they gloss over it. So the use of propaganda, drugs, and constant fear-mongering is to drive the mentally helpless into submission and acceptance. This is what the lostness of the mind, or the wilderness of the mind, is all about. And if you put that into a search engine, you will get the George Hunt information, the wilderness of the mind and the lostness of the mind, but you won't find any other references to it. So, this is the key point, the key question to ask yourself. Are you mentally helpless? If not, that's very good to hear. But if we look at the fakery and trivialities which are the focus of most people, then it is clear that it has been quite successful. This lostness of the mind, this wilderness of the mind project. The distractions have captured nearly all, and every bit of truth is infiltrated and surrounded by further distraction, layer upon layer of deception. and something for all. New Age emptiness or fake movements, fake right, fake left, fake centre. All this is part of the goal, the Sustainable Development Goals. On a comedy level, it is quite entertaining. From the cults created years ago, like Findhorn in Scotland, just take a look at it. Findhorn was a cult centre of the New Age, and they still have meetings up there today. It's nothing like it was in its heyday, but people still go up there for a little wilderness of the mind. And what they do with the word indigenous is very, very funny if you watch these conferences and the people that turn up as the so-called indigenous at these, well, let's call it a fancy dress party. Indigenous now means disingenuous as far as the UN recruited numbskulls who impose sustainable development go. For instance, the focus on costumed change agents dressed as the indigenous is a cynical twisting of reality and, more importantly, history. These puppets parade themselves as the noble ancestors and living embodiments of authentic cultural identity. Nothing could be further from the truth, and everything within this program is based on deception. These poncho-wearing dupes talking about Pachamama are sold out to an agenda. Yes, Mother Earth is crying tears. This was, of course, the basis of Robert Mueller, the UN Secretary General in the 70s, and his push for the New Age global Gaia religion. We've covered that in many shows, and you can find everything you need to know about Robert Mueller on the free books page, windowsontheworld.net. This show is going to really join a few more dots though, and I wanted to do something about Maurice Strong, who was the granddaddy of the climate change and Gaia cult, for quite a while, and tonight we're going to be doing just that. So we're going to give you a lot of new information in this show. But yes, the World Bank project of sustainable development is what we're talking about, the biggest looting and land grabbing operation in human history. Remember, of course, that the Vatican claimed much of the Earth's surface over the past 700 to 800 years, and they are still a very big players within this, but the UN system is global and it's in full cooperation with the Vatican, and the Vatican own an awful lot of land. But the UN have now underwritten all the land on the earth for the World Bank and their favoured corporations. And we've covered this in so many shows that if you want to know the detail, do a bit of research. But this is not just a few paid-for stooges we're talking about here. These are the theatre puppets of a world army which aims to recruit by hook or by crook everyone born on the planet. So next time you see the indigenous at a UN conference, you are looking at a promoted puppet, nothing more. These people, if they do know what they're doing, are sold out. If they don't know what they're doing, they're useful idiots. Take your pick. One or the other. The UN even have a group called the Elders, a bunch of virtue signalling brain dead but useful dupes. And of course, the person who wrote Our Common Future and put that out there, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the Prime Minister of Norway, also a member of the World Communist Association, because they're all communists. Well, they're communists for the common good, which is for the common people. But they are elitists amongst themselves. That's where the hypocrisy really lies. So yes, Our Common Future, we've done a lot on that, and you can download Our Common Future on the free books page at windowsontheworld.net. This is a massive project, but it's very simple and it runs your life. No, I'm not exaggerating. It runs your life if you let it. The difference here being that if you know how this works, you can work around it and within it. That is the key to overcoming problems which people are facing. You have to know how this system works. Once you know how it works, you can usurp it. You can be an individual and still survive within this collectivism. So yes, they are the same mindset, these people that we're talking about here, whether it's the indigenous idiots or the elders or any other branch of the Sustainable Development Programme the same mindset as the environmental officers making decisions not on your behalf but for a bunch of criminals in your local council. Yes, your cabinet members for the environment and these people with fancy names are all working under sustainable development. And yes, Sustainable Development Agenda 21, Local Agenda 21, went into your local council about 1999. I've seen the documents. You can find them too, with a little bit of persistence. Yes, who are these people? They want to own the most desirable parts of the planet and keep the cattle like you and me herded into the smart cities that they're building everywhere. Brand new one in Egypt is being constructed at the moment. Of course, we've got NEOM in Saudi Arabia, which will probably never be built. It's called the Line, but lots of money will be laundered through it. And we're going to get into that tonight, the absolute hypocrisy of this. It's a massive money laundering theft of the Commons programme. So that is what sustainable development really means. None of this will work, but they started, so they do intend to finish, and they're going in one direction. Meanwhile, the front puppets dance to the tune of the World Bank, who now have a $41 billion black hole in their climate finances. That shows you what these climate programs, these green technology programs are all about. They can't even hide the fact that there's a $41 billion black hole in this climate change agenda from the World Bank. And that is just what has been found out, remember, without really digging. This was found out by some researchers recently. They found it all by accident as well. It was always a looting scam, and it was never about the environment. It was useful in bankrupting and infiltration of the African nations especially, though. They admit that this is not an environmental project, by the way, and in my talks I outlined their hypocrisy, as have a few others over the years. Not so many in the UK, but many in America. I went round the UK talking about this for about 3 or 4 years, but I'd been talking about it on the internet since 2008, 2009. And when the big society came in, which is the communitarian agenda, which dovetailed into this, I was talking about it then. And you can go back to videos in our archive and you'll see the whole history of it. Check out A Business Plan for the World at windowsontheworld.net. I did this talk at the Glastonbury Symposium in 2019. Just look it up. Most of the information that backs this up and gives you even more of a background is there, all on the website and at the click of a mouse if you know where to look. And this is the thing, it's absolutely public. So why are the public still thinking about party politics when all parties are one solid mechanism working for one aim? Okay, one of the globalist engineers of the scam was Maurice Strong, who initiated not only the Rio Conference in '92, but the Earth Charter in 2000, and he was the head of the United Nations Committee on Environment and Development. In fact, he set it up. He made billions, and much of it was in the oil industry. Strong died quite a few years ago in 2015, but his legacy lives on. This is why it's so important. We need to know the history of what we're talking about here. His Baca Ranch, which we're going to get onto, was a melting pot of pseudo-spirituality mixed with his ruthless business plan. The use of New Age delusional prophecies coming from the clueless has been a major driving force, which the UN system has used to front its anti-Christian globalist financiers' earth religion. That's what it is. It's a globalist financial world earth religion. The idea of the Earth Charter originated in 1987 by Maurice Strong and Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev was a massive player in this new system. The system that those who are not really au fait with call the New World Order. The term New World Order is for those who know a little, but those who know a lot will call it global governance. Those people who know a little bit of what they're talking about will call it global governance. The people who actually know what it's really about will call it unstructured global governance. So, Yes, Maurice Strong, Mikhail Gorbachev, members of the Club of Rome. This was when the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development called for a new charter to guide the transition to sustainable development. Basically, the looting of the commons on the back of saving the planet. The motto of sustainable development is having less impact in the present so future generations will not be impacted by the results of the people who are living now. The actions of the people who are living now will not impact on the actions of people in the future. That's the worthy word salad behind it. That is not how it works, though. In 1994, Maurice Strong, chairman of the Earth Summit, and Mikhail Gorbachev, working through organisations they had each founded, remember, the Earth Council and Green Cross International, they restarted the Earth Charter as a civil society initiative with the help of the government of the Netherlands. Various religious groups from a wide range of religions supported the Earth Charter and still do. The Soka Gakkai International, representing more than 12 million Buddhists worldwide, supports the Earth Charter and has done since its inception. Buddhism. Brainless, empty, useful idiots kept in the dark to serve their masters with their empty eyes, empty fake smiles. Perfect global religion fodder. Buddhism is an elite system and the monks are the servants of that elite system. And Tibet being the seat of ancient control, Buddhists have always been pawns in the hands of the elite. Look at the present Dalai Lama, a sold out, hypocritical, lying puppet. That's my opinion, by the way, but I think you'll find it's true. So who else was involved with this? The Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, representing over 1,000 Unitarian Universalist congregations in the United States, supports this also. The official body of the Baha'i faith reacted when the Earth Charter was put forward by saying it will continue to participate in related activities such as conferences, forums and the like. The World Pantheist Movement, which supports a naturalistic view of religion, also endorses the plan. The Leadership Conference of Women Religious, a Catholic organisation in the US, approved the measure in 2004. The Episcopal Diocese of Newark in New Jersey, an Episcopalian Christian organisation, endorsed the Earth Charter in 2009. They've all jumped on board since then, by the way. Earth Charter International, the organisation responsible for promoting the Charter, states in its literature that the Earth Charter is respectful and inclusive of all religious traditions. Inclusive, meaning you can join, but if you don't, you're full of hate. They say that the Charter itself makes no statements to support claims of intent to supplant any of the world's religions or to create a world government. Well, that's deceptive, you see, because by infiltration, it does exactly the opposite of that. The infiltration is the bringing in of these favoured religions to create a one world religion. In other words, you take the power out of Christianity and you basically meld everything into this neo-pagan financial scam. That's what it is. So the Earth Charter asserts that the Charter is a statement of common ethical values towards, wait for it, sustainability, that recognises humanity's, here we go, shared responsibility to the Earth and to each other. That's the communitarian, hive-minded global consensus, by the way. They have already agreed on your behalf. The Charter had received opposition from several groups. For example, in the United States, members of religious groups, such as the so-called religious right, have objected to the document on the grounds that it is secular and espouses socialism, which of course it does. But this is beyond socialism. Using terms like socialism to describe this is not that helpful because it encompasses everything. In addition, the document is a kind of 10 commandments of globalist deception dressed up in fake worthiness. It's very easy to see through, though. Well, during the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa, a copy of the document was placed symbolically in an Ark of Hope, which was an independent project by the American artist Sally Linder. Now, they use lots of useful idiots for this, millions of them. Of course, we're not just talking about Seven Suzuki, who was the daughter of David Suzuki, who has been used by the UN, who was the previous Greta Thunberg, by the way, a sort of more articulate and pleasant version of Greta Thunberg. Well, most things are more articulate and pleasant than Greta Thunberg, I suppose. But what we're talking about here is a system. Sustainable development is in fact religious, symbolic, Freemasonic and communitarian. It's run through global networks of NGOs and favoured corporate parasites. So we're going to get on to Maurice Strong in a minute. Quite a lot of info there, so I'll have a quick break. Welcome back. That was from the soundtrack of The Heretics of London, The Smithfield Martyrs. The soundtrack is by The Luminaries, and if you go to windowsontheworld.net and look up The Heretics of London, you can download the film on the homepage, or you can download the soundtrack. I use that a lot because the music lends itself to a little bit of reflection between information and the sort of serious stuff that we put out. Just wanted to also let you know that if you support the £5 a month club and you've sent in an email and I haven't responded with my new bank details, then please send the email again. I've gone through my spam folder and found a couple in there, but I get so much spam going to the info at windowsontheworld.net. If you could put in the header £5 a month club, then I will be able to find it if it's in the spam folder. So thanks to everyone who supports the show. And for those that want to, please do. You can do that on the homepage at Windows on the World. And you can also do it by emailing me at info@windowsontheworld.net. Just as an aside, before we get back into this, I've just remembered that one of the lectures of the late General Konstantin Petrov referred to the conference in Johannesburg in 2002. Remember, Rio was in 92. But not a lot had happened between 92 and 2002. So what happened apparently at this conference was the global corporations and banks got together and they said, we will enforce this globally if you give us unrestricted access to everything which affects the livelihood of all people. In other words, the infrastructure. Therefore, we have corporates like Vanguard and BlackRock and Lend-Lease coming in and running infrastructure in countries. And of course, then we've got these armies of people who are brought into all local governance through this system, which has been going on now for 25, 30 years. And the public is still talking about political parties in relation to what's happening locally. Well, unless the political parties know what we're talking about here, then they are a complete and utter waste of time. So the UK is way behind the United States in looking into this. The people that I learned most about sustainable development from were actually US based, and some of the videos were very matter of fact. They were just slideshows by ordinary people, And what they put out 15, 20 years ago was shocking then. But now we're in a totally new phase with it. And everything's happening at once. Things are moving extremely quickly, I'm sure you've noticed. So Maurice Strong said, too much had happened at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development for me to just let it go. The more I thought about the prospect for implementation of its results, the less I thought it sensible to codepend only on governments. I could see how easily governments, caught up in the serious crisis in the management of a modern state, could shunt the conference's recommendations into bureaucratic corners where they would neither bother anyone or achieve much. And we've got to remember, Maurice Strong got up at the Rio Conference in '92 and he said things such as private transport, air conditioning, even golf courses were not sustainable. There was a whole list of stuff he says wasn't sustainable, and he'd also said that the only way that this system could work was to bring down the economies of the Western countries. And he also said, isn't it our responsibility to do that? So we're talking about someone who's a global player here, who had this fake environmental front, also said he was a communist. He actually ended up in China, but he was a ruthless capitalist. And this is what sustainable development is all about. It's about looting the global commons for these people with a lot of money who think in their own tiny minds that they are somehow above everyone else, which is, of course, their downfall. Let's carry on with this. As the preparations for UNCED had proceeded, Maurice Strong said, I had become increasingly convinced that its ultimate results would depend to a great extent on the actions of non-governmental organisations and citizens groups, what we now more generally refer to as civil society. So do you get what he's saying here? Let's see. We'll carry on and then do some summing up of this. So many thousands of local and grassroots groups had emerged in developing countries as well as the more developed ones. Maurice Strong said he could see the urgent need to provide them with better links to each other and to the policy and decision-making processes that affect them. This is what unstructured global governments is all about. The urgent need to provide them with better links to each other and to the policy and decision-making processes that affect them. And remember, people like Strong were in a position to put this through. He had the world listening to him. The most important people, the decision makers of the world, were all listening to him at the time. So he says, during the latter part of the preparatory period, I had begun testing an idea on some of my friends and colleagues. The notion was to set up a new global non-governmental body, which I called an Earth Council, with the goal of activating and servicing a network of NGOs and citizen groups committed to implementing the results of the Earth Summit, cooperating rather than competing with existing organisations. Here he's talking about the infiltration of everything through NGOs. Can you see how this works? He's giving you the blueprint of how it operates now. It was to focus especially on grassroots. The word grassroots now means it's an imposition from above masquerading as some kind of community. That's all it is. Of course, Extinction Rebellion was grassroots, but it's a City of London project. It came out of Climate Camp Action, which was an undercover police operation which took the finances from Occupy and steered things into a different direction. And we've done so much on this that I would recommend you look at a recent show we did called Truthers Don't Get Fooled Again. Then you can go to articles at windowsontheworld.net. COVID protest social engineers will give you a lot of links. So look that one up. Okay, let's get back to this. So we're talking here about grassroots, community level organisations, all using the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals. We've done shows on Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was a radical campaigner in the early 60s, and he used very subversive methods which were very effective. And if you want to know more about that, look up Rules for Radicals. You can download it on the free books page at winnersontheworld.net. We really are a mine of information with this stuff. This is why I find it difficult to know where to start, and that's why I keep it very, very simple, because there's nothing complicated about what's going on. It's incredibly simple. So yes, I'll just read that paragraph again because it's so important. The notion was to set up a new global non-governmental body which Maurice Strong called an Earth Council, with the goal of activating and servicing a network of global NGOs and citizens groups committed to implementing the results of the Earth Summit, cooperating rather than competing with existing organisations. Infiltration of everything is what he's talking about. It was to focus especially on grassroots and community level organisations in the developing countries that had little access to external resources or international ties. I've seen this in so-called third world countries, the UN habitat signs, which is their way of infiltrating through taking over infrastructure. The UN trying to break up the tribal customs and put this idea of empowering women in there so that you get this competitiveness going on between the sexes. This is all divide and rule stuff. It's nothing to do with empowerment and never was. And this is, of course, where we find the drivers of change from the political Soros-funded action groups. Well, let's talk about one. The Sortition Foundation, funded by Open Society, 7 parliamentary committees, I think, decided on using Soros, by the way, about 5 years ago, to give you citizens' assemblies, which is exactly what Maurice Strong is talking about. He's talking about implementing the global consensus from above, but making it look like you agreed to it. That's all citizens' assemblies are. Look up citizens' assemblies on winnersontheworld.net. I don't know why anybody else is not talking about this, but it's basically the way you're going to be steered into everything. You've already agreed to have your houses retrofitted, starting at 25 grand, by the way. I don't know whether you knew that. That was the Oxford Citizens Assembly on climate change. They had them all over the country. That's why I say I don't know where to start with this. I can talk about it all night long, but it's dead simple. You're being duped. That's all there is to it. So, yes, Extinction Rebellion, the climate cult organisations which pushed for and now have global citizens' assemblies. In effect, these are policy steering groups which steer the public into already intended and predicted outcomes with no public participation, but of course with the illusion of it. Well, what do you expect from ex-communists and bankers? Capitalist communists, of course. So, Maurice Strong again says, I found a great deal of interest and some strong allies. Of course he did. He was a billionaire. Part of my idea was to locate the new organisation in the developing world. This was to bring up the third world countries, but the West would be brought down with the carbon taxation. But the developing countries would, for a time, be allowed to rise, but they were going to be rising on the back of enormous debt. Therefore, they'd already been bought, they'd been sold. And now we see this in these smaller African nations. Like, I think Burkina Faso was mentioned. I think there was a coup there years ago. Wasn't Thatcher's son involved in it? If you look at these small African states that have been taken over, and you get these puppets there who are just spouting the sustainable development stuff all day long, but you get the odd one that isn't, and they're the ones they're still trying to replace. So yes, he had strong allies. He says, part of my idea was to locate the new organisation in the developing world. I wanted to make a clear exception to the vast majority of international NGOs, almost all headquartered in and dominated by the more developed countries. Remember, we're going back to the early 90s here. The unstructured system of governance, which has been resisted by some nations but accepted by most, has been covered over many years on these shows. So go into the archive and have a look. But the policies driving the big green lie, yes, a lie, as it is based on lies, affects the world population through massive taxation and restriction. Those still talking about party politics have missed the boat. It's too late now. For those curious enough, and there are at least a few, Our show, The Fourth World in the Archive, along with The Man Who Saw the Future, will be a good backup to what we're talking about here. So, basically, here's a quote from R.J. Rushdoony, and this was in response to what the UN were doing, and he's an Armenian, he died actually in 2001, was an Armenian-American Calvinist philosopher, historian and theologian, and his whole family had gone into the priesthood. So basically every generation of the family had produced a Christian priest or minister, and this is what he had to say about it. We will either fail to understand the UN or to cope with it unless we recognise that it is religious in inspiration and a religious necessity for humanism. The religion of humanity. So basically, it's a humanist religion that these people are pushing. But really, they want you to be steered into this wilderness of the mind, this lostness of the mind, where there are no real beliefs. There are only sound bites. So you become disempowered and you become part of this system. So I'm going to go back now to an article which was from 1989, Associated Press, about Crestone, Colorado, where the Baca Ranch, this huge place, which Maurice Strong and his wife Hannah took over, and about 200,000 acres, I think. It's called Colorado Site, a place of power. Spiritualists, environmentalists find haven in the Baca. Hannah Strong unrolls her blueprint of a global village for spiritual leaders and environmentalists and pins its corners down on her kitchen table with an expensive tea set. It shows a band of temples and churches, gardens and small self-sufficient communities laid out along the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Some of what is in the plan already has been realised. Some is in the words, some is being worked on, and some exists just in prophecy, says Hannah Strong in 1989. Like Strong, who travels the area's back roads in skirts and silk blouses as comfortably as in jeans, the plan is at once earthy and elegant, serious and a little spacey, embracing the disadvantaged 1 minute and industrial magnates and movie stars the next. That sums it up quite well. The paragraph is called Seeking a Major Shift. Unenlightened, confused minds are ruling the world and destroying the environment, Hannah Strong says. There needs to be a major shift in the way people think. Strong and her husband, Canadian oil developer and UN diplomat Maurice Strong, hope to turn several thousand acres of desert and mountains in southern Colorado's San Luis Valley into a repository of spiritual truth and environmentally sound living. A place where political and business leaders can come to be taught how to care for themselves and the earth. In other words, an indoctrination centre into this globalist bankers cult. It says they don't want a lot of people who would tax the area's fragile natural balance. This is the point. They still believe in this Malthusian view of the world as overpopulated. Even though population is now in decline, they still think there's too many people because they want to live in the clean environmental areas where they can do what they want. The place, originally part of the 160,000 acre Baca Spanish land grant ranch, is called just the Baca. Area Indians believe it to be sacred neutral ground where tribes could come together. Hannah Strong believes it has kept that power intact. Now, the irony of all this is that they were charging these religious groups to be on the land. They didn't invite them for nothing. Remember, it's all about business. Hannah Strong, Maurice's New Age wife, helped push the globalist religion part of the business. She was a true delusionist. And basically, these people have convinced themselves that they are superior, but they present themselves as if they are part of some global recognition of neo-paganism, of embracing the so-called indigenous when they're just using them like dupes as front puppets. Next paragraph, it says, land given away. The Strongs already have given away hundreds of acres to Carmelite Catholics, Tibetan Buddhist monks, Zen monks, American Indian tribes, and the yoga-based Sri Aurobindo Learning Centre. They put up chapels, hermitages, temples, sweat lodges, community buildings and gardens, no churches of course. On the blueprint, Strong has set aside 2,000 more choice acres for other religious groups she believes will come to the backer someday, as earlier groups did on their own. It says here, she does not go out recruiting. She's a native of Denmark who personally feels closest to the Indian spiritual tradition. Strong says she represents and respects all spirituality, but intends the backer to be for religious and for religions with an unbroken lineage. And laughingly, she says, not the so-called New Age groups. She says this is old age. She says with a laugh, very old. This is the delusion that they live under. Under Strong, AZL, this company began consolidating tracts of land, giving some to spiritual groups and selling some. Later on, of course, it was all about the money. The company merged with Los Angeles-based Tosco in 1983, and Tosco sold the backer in 1986 to a group of investors led by Maurice Strong. Other investors include former US Environmental Protection Agency Chief William Ruckelshaus, Canadian financier Sam Belzberg, Anderson and his son Robert B. Anderson, and others. That group still owns the ranch, but sold the development in 1987 to local developers. You see, this is what it's about. It's all about venture capitalism. The whole thing is about that. However, the globalist puppets and religions still have to pay to be there, of course. There is no such thing as a sustainable development free lunch. There is always a price to pay to the overlords. Well, we know that, don't we? Look at the taxation. Look at ULEZ. Look at any of it. It's all about the shekels. Hannah Strong, Maurice's New Age wife, then laughingly met a local mystic. Don't you just hate that word now? Mystic. If someone says they're a mystic, you know they're an idiot now, don't you? Yes, a spaced out but gullible fool with a strong sense of their own importance, usually with a long beard and a stick. They talk in cliches and fail to respond to points of argument. That's what a mystic means these days, isn't it? The sage to influence the Strongs, it says, was Glenn Ulysses Anderson, born in the Dakotas before the turn of the 20th century. He was viewed as a modern-day prophet by many whom he encountered, and led a selfless life where he committed himself to restore balance on the planet and help all those he encountered awaken to the spirit of serving the greater good, the common good. This being that you sacrifice all for the planet, and the likes of Strong and his criminals, they just take the lot. A quote: "The age that is upon us is one of collective awakening." Again, collectivism, you see. So here's this guru, Glenn Ulysses Anderson. The age that is upon us is one of collective awakening, where in the past it seemed an individual experience. Well, any kind of awakening is an individual experience. You can't have a group awakening. That's an egregor. It's basically a manipulation, hive-mindedness. Yes, he says that it was all about a collective awakening. It's an individual experience we're talking about here. Otherwise, it's groupthink, an egregor, or just a cult, which is of course what this is. He says, a wave of energy is coming, and has been coming for many eons. It pulsates as a living breath, inhaling and exhaling in perfect harmony. This word salad crap these idiots come out with really winds me up, you know, because it doesn't mean anything. Any one of these New Age gurus could have said that. It's the same thing. There's going to be a great awakening. No, the people who follow the Great Awakening are in a groupthink, mind-controlled egregor which goes nowhere. It never has gone anywhere and never will. That is the lostness of the mind. That is the wilderness of the mind. That is the New Age. He says, it is like the 4 seasons that come and go without hindrance from mankind. Oh my God, can you imagine this bore being in the same room as you? And these people are lapping it up, of course, because Maurice Strong was no idiot. His wife might be a spaced out hippie. But he knew exactly what he was doing. But don't you just love the way they don't say anything specific or even useful, these idiots? So, now we get on to the founder, Maurice Strong. So this is Manitou.org, the foundation. The Manitou Foundation is what it's called now. Founded by Maurice Strong, the New Age spouse of the ruthless businessman and capitalist/communist criminal Maurice Strong. Yes, there is criminality involved, by the way. Okay, let's see what she says on Manitou.org. In 1977, my husband Maurice Strong and partners purchased AZL, a large ranching operation consisting of 2 million acres in the southwestern United States. There's one thing you can say about these people is they don't like sharing. AZL's land holdings included 2 parcels totaling 46,000 acres in Colorado, the Louis Maria Baca Ranch and the Baca Grande development. At the first executive meeting, the board suggested that Maurice immediately sell the Baca Grande development and the Louis Maria Baca Ranch, as the property resulted in a $30 million loss in revenue to the company. Maurice, myself and my family were to relocate to Phoenix. But after 1 month of looking for a place to live, what were they looking for? 1 million acres or something? I told Maurice that I could not live there as I didn't feel a connection to it. He then suggested we take a look at other company land holdings and ranches. We looked in Arizona, New Mexico and Colorado, and when we flew into the Baca, I got out of the plane, looked at the mountains and said, "This is it." I instantly recognized the land, felt its spirit and felt the sacred mountains welcome us. At that moment, we both decided not to sell the Baca, as this would be our new home. I did not know at the time that many people throughout the valley knew Glenn, this is the mystic, beardy stick man, as the local mystic and prophet. His first words were, get this, so he sees these 2 billionaires arriving, and he says, with his beard and his stick, and his hair blowing in the breeze, "I have been waiting for you to arrive." Oh, that old chestnut. The pupil arrives when they're ready. So the teacher arrives when the pupil is ready. Just like in the Aquarian Conspiracy, which you probably bloody read. All the New Agers read that in the 80s. Marilyn Ferguson done shows on that too. The Aquarian Conspiracy. It was like the New Age Bible. It was like pre-Celestine prophecy, where all the hive-minded New Agers all think they're making this massive connection. Yeah, the massive connections to the World Bank and the new governance system. They just didn't know that at the time. Some of them still don't. Over the course of the next 4 days, he transmitted, this is Glenn the mystic, what he had received from Spirit about the future purpose of this land and my role in fulfilling this vision that he received from Spirit. Oh dear. When Hannah and Glenn visited the vacant site where the desert sage is now located, he stood there and cried. Tears streamed down his face as he asked, "Where are all the buildings? Where is the dining hall, the teachers and temples?" So this entitled parasite is actually not into living in a wilderness simply. He actually wants to have a town built for him. Glenn spoke specifically about climate change and said it's not only about global warming, it is about climate extremes. Part of the world will experience another ice age, so he couldn't even make up his mind about that. So this was a few years before global warming, because global warming wasn't the fashion accessory that it is now. the driver of change that it is now, rather. Funny that he wanted to develop this natural paradise into a small city for UN useful idiots to gather. I wonder who he was actually channeling. I wonder whose spirit actually was. It was probably something demonic, I would suggest. I wonder where he got that from. Yeah, channeling demons again. After Glenn shared this information, she says, I fasted in the mountains for 4 days and 4 nights and was told by Spirit that I needed to draw a map of the mountains and include the world's religious traditions. How did she and the UN have exactly the same idea for a global neo-pagan religion as the front for such a massive con? Well, she said, I was further told that this land is Hopi territory and that I must go to the Hopi land to consult with the elders. I already had a history with a Hopi elder, Thomas Banyaka, whom I met in Stockholm in 1972. We'd kept in communication over the years and I had helped Thomas facilitate the earth healing ceremonies during the Habitat Conference. Well, Habitat is how the UN infiltrate communities with new development aid, in case you didn't know. It's about infrastructure, control of infrastructure. They have a Habitat Conference every 2 years. About 42 people watch it on YouTube, and that's where they actually plan the 15-minute cities from. That's where these ideas came from. In other words, they have a conference every 2 years, which 42 people out of 8 billion, I think there's 8 billion now, isn't there? Something like that, in the world watch, which is why people don't know what's actually going on. Enrique Peñalosa arranged for Thomas to read his statement, she says, which was called a warning to the world, to heads of government. It's a bit like what they've always used kids as well to do. So David Suzuki, the so-called environmentalist daughter, and now Greta Thunberg, they've always used kids to rally up the support at these conferences. But so it's the same thing again. He's talking about a warning to the world, to heads of government. Thomas mentioned a world spiritual centre. So the indigenous UN useful deluded idiot was in place as usual when all of these events take place. There's always the UN deluded useful idiot there. Thomas Banyaka is addressed to the UN on June the 8th, 1976. I'm going to give you a quote from his address. If the United Nations cannot prevent the destruction of mankind and Mother Nature by political means, they should now support a meeting of the world spiritual leaders with the Hopi nation. All nations who come to our homeland should recognise our spiritual foundation and support the establishment of a spiritual centre for all mankind. Did he know he was working for the World Bank? Maybe, maybe not. He says, in 1978, after my fast... Oh, hang on a minute. This is back up to her again. That was him, by the way. Thomas Banyaka of the Hopi Nation. So let's get back to Hannay now, the New Age spouse of Maurice. In 1978, after my fast, I made a trip to Hopi land, like Disneyland, where I was taken to a sacred, it has to be sacred, doesn't it? Kiva deep within the earth. So the big hole in the ground she went into by the sound of it. Where, here we go. After hours of ceremony and prayers, the elders communicated that the vision was correct and that the Hopi shared a similar prophecy to that of the UN, of course. Oh, what a coincidence. Two delusions happening at the same time. Synchronicity. They further stated that this centre had to take place near the Eastern Mountain, the most sacred of their mountains, where the light comes into the world. I received their confirmation blessing and began the journey forward, says Hannay. Well, Maurice has already made his mind up what he's doing, so she's just following, I suppose. So the delusion of Strong's wife never got on or got in the way of business. In fact, the New Age deception helped Maurice enormously with creating climate change and the new front religion for global looting. It was Maurice Strong, Stephen Rockefeller and Edmund de Rothschild who created the business side of the cult. And Strong described himself as both a capitalist and a communist, and even tried to privatise the aquifers on this Baca ranch, which would have decimated the farms and the environment. And he knew this. He knew it would do that, but he couldn't help himself because he was a vulture. He was a financial vulture. And that's what this is really about, the theft of the global commons. But this time, he was caught out and this was exposed in the courts. Now, Maurice Strong did die quite a few years ago, but we're talking about his legacy here. His legacy is in every town hall, in every town and village, not just in the United Kingdom, around the world. He died 2015 in China. So, there's a couple of articles here. At the United Nations, The Curious Career of Maurice Strong, that's fdd.org, and financialtimes.com. Some information about Maurice Strong and his business deals. But Strong never let morals or decency get in the way of his business deals at all. Inside the oil for food scandal, that's what we're going to go into. According to the US Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Saddam Hussein was able to amass more than $21 billion in illegal funds under the UN's nose through smuggling and kickbacks, a staggering level of corruption. Of course, the UN will do anything they can or want to do because their Charter of 1947 puts them above all international law. The UN cannot be prosecuted in any court on the planet. However, they can bring prosecutions against people they don't like. They are above all international law. It's in the UN Charter of 1947. You can find that on the website as well. Just put in New Age Global Governance, it should come up. It says other US lawmakers and commentators have called the Oil for Food programme the worst scandal in the UN's history. Who was behind it? Maurice Strong. Kofi Annan, the UN's Secretary General, was criticised for allowing it to happen and for allegedly failing to offer full cooperation to external investigators. Nothing changes with the front puppets at the UN, whether it's Ban Ki-moon, Kofi Annan or Ted Ross. Ted Ross is probably even worse. Kofi Annan was just a softly spoken word salad puppet. Oh, of course, they've all done worthy things in the past, but once they join the UN club, then that's it for life. But Maurice Strong is best known as the godfather of the environment movement, who served from 1973 to 1975 as the founding director of the United Nations Environmental Programme. UNEP, a globe-girdling organisation with a yearly budget of $136 million US, claims to act as the world's environmental conscience. Strong consolidated his eco-credentials as the organiser of the UN's 1992 Environmental Summit in Rio de Janeiro, which in turn paved the way for the 1997 Kyoto Treaty on controlling greenhouse gas emissions. Strong was standing behind the shoulder of every UN secretary since U Thant. So going back to 1947, 48 was when the UN was set up. It's been the same steps forward. These environmental groups like IUCN, just look them up. Look up ICLEI, ICLEI, that's Local Government for Environmental Initiatives. That's in your town hall, by the way. That's where your smart city stuff comes from. That's where your taxation on greenhouse gases comes from. That's where your ULEZ comes from. So without ever holding elected office, Maurice had had a hand in some of the world's most important bureaucratic appointments, both at UN and the World Bank. He was a Canadian wheeler dealer with an apple face and pencil moustache. He's got a very weird face. Quite evil looking, really. Strong has parlayed his personal enthusiasms and connections into a variety of huge UN projects while punctuating his public service with private business deals. Along the way, Strong had also been caught up in a series of UN scandals and conflicts of interest. These extend from the aforementioned notorious Oil for Food programme to the furore over cash funneled via UN agencies to the rogue regime in North Korea, which involves, among other things, Strong's creative use of a little-known UN-chartered educational institution called, wait for it, the University for Peace. Above all, the tale of Maurice Strong illustrates the way in which the UN, with its bureaucratic culture of secrecy, its diplomatic immunities and its global reach, lends itself to manipulation by a small circle of those who best know its back corridors. Great way of describing it. So when you see these UN conferences, what you are just seeing is this public display. It is nothing to do with how it works. It's been manipulated by relatively few people. But Strong officially cut his ties to the UN Secretariat. Federal investigators in 1997, while serving as top advisor to then Secretary General Kofi Annan, the federal investigators found Strong had taken a cheque for almost 1 million that was bankrolled by Iraq's UN-sanctioned regime. So he was doing deals behind the curtain with anybody he could. He was a complete and utter hypocrite and criminal. The cheque was delivered by a South Korean businessman, Tong Sun Park, who was convicted in New York federal court of conspiring to bribe UN officials on behalf of Baghdad. So Maurice was the benefactor of all that. Strong denied any wrongdoing, of course, and said he would step aside from his UN envoy post until the matter was cleared up. After that, Strong has receded. He went into the background, as he often did. He's now operating in the shadows. Remember, he died in 2015. He later spent most of his time in China. He wouldn't really disclose what he was doing there. He had something to do with the export of cars, but he was a communist sympathiser. And of course, like all really powerful communists, he was a billionaire and an elitist, which is where communism really came from. Sustainable development is just an updated version of that with a global Gaia religion cult. So yes, it says his name flickered recently through the speaker lineup for a gala dinner for clean technologies in San Francisco, but the organisers say he then cancelled because he had so much going on in China. China was a special place for Strong, a self-declared lifelong socialist. It is the burial place of a woman said to be one of his relatives, actually, the famous pro-communist American journalist Anna Louise Strong, a vociferous supporter of Lenin and Stalin until the mid-30s, and a strong booster of Mao Zedong's China. Maurice Strong's presence in Beijing raised awkward questions. For one thing, China, while one of the world's biggest producers of industrial pollution, has been profiting from the trading of carbon emissions credits, thanks to heavily politicised UN-backed environmental deals engineered by Maurice Strong in the 90s. Strong had refused to answer questions from Fox News about the nature of his business in China. Well, this that we've been talking about is the very essence of sustainable development. That is scratching the surface. But all of it links up on the website. And I've done so much work on this. As I say, I don't know when to start or stop, because I can go through, I can link so many things to other things. Things were jumping into my head all the way through that, about Maurice Strong, about Stephen Rockefeller, about Edmund de Rothschild, about the Rothschilds in London actually being behind the carbon trading emissions paper in 2008. It was announced in 2008. You can download that. It's on The Man Who Saw the Future. You can download the carbon trading potential document, and that document is forbidden to be put into the media. They said you can't talk about this. Absolutely incredible. So this is the very essence of sustainability to these parasites. They are sustained at the expense of everyone else and do not care about how they do it. Again, yeah, see The Man Who Saw the Future and The Fourth World, winnersontheworld.net. So we're going to go now to another article. Well, maybe I should have another break, because this is going to be quite a long show. It's for the people who want to know, though. So I'm glad you're staying with it, dear listener. Welcome back. Just a short one there. I think it's good to actually break this up a bit as well. We're going to go in this last section into what did Maurice Strong actually stand for? Well, the key phrase is sustainable development. This is the ruling principle articulated by Maurice Strong and his friends, and it has three elements. One, social equity, which means global redistribution of wealth. Two, economic prosperity, which is supposed to come about through partnerships between businesses and government. Well, that actually just means top-down control of everything. This is the corporate interface of favoured corporations. Three is ecological integrity. Well, as far as Strong is concerned, that's a complete logical fallacy, isn't it? Ecological and integrity when we're talking about Maurice Strong. In other words, though, the government control all land use. That's what it means to you. Well, Maurice Strong was the man behind all this. Take out the words Soviet Union, add ecological integrity, and it's the same program. Marx and Lenin don't inspire people anymore. But take their ideas, give them a nice coat of environmental green, and you've got a worldwide movement going. Henry Lamb, who was a commentator on this document I'm reading from, said, these people are enjoying a 30-year reign over the global environmental movement. Does it affect us here in America? You bet. Our domestic policy flows directly from this international agenda, and that was 30 years ago. Let's get on to the religious angle. Strong had been accused of promulgating a new... Right, okay. Sorry, I had a little bit of a dropout there. It's all right. Everything's working as it should. Yes, the religious angle. Strong had been accused of promulgating a new world religion, a form of earth worship, embodied in the Earth Charter, which he co-authored, by the way, with Mikhail Gorbachev, the ex-Soviet premier, and, of course, David Rockefeller, a guru of the so-called interfaith movement. They are actively trying to displace Christianity, says Tom DeWeese. And Tom DeWeese, that's DEWEESE. Look him up. He has done some amazing work and still continues to do so on what came out of Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, all the same stuff. Tom DeWeese said, Earth worship drives the global environmental movement, and Mr. Strong seems to be a real believer. Well, he'd be a believer in it because it fuels his business plan. He was also very active in the UN Religious Initiative, was Maurice. These people go all over the US holding seminars and workshops, said Tom DeWeese. They have Baptist ministers preaching paganism out of the pulpit. So, full infiltration of everything is the goal of sustainable development. According to a special report by Austin Ruse of the Catholic Family and Human Rights Institute, the Religious Initiative Bill itself, the Religious Initiative of the UN, bills itself as spiritual partner and supports abortion, artificial conception and homosexual marriage. Well, we know that. All this is being pushed now, isn't it? This is just now in the news. This was 30 years ago. We're talking about stuff that has now gone into Ireland, gone into the UK. There has been an amendment to abortion in the UK, and people can now no longer actually participate in protesting against it or even oppose it legally outside an abortion centre, which people were previously allowed to do silently. Can't do that anymore. Strong had ties to such diverse alternative religion enterprises as the Temple of Understanding, the Interfaith Centre and the Lindisfarne Association. Now, he paid for the Lindisfarne Association to move its headquarters from New York City to Boca Grande, Colorado, and there he put them on the ranch with him. Lindisfarne mixes Christianity with Tibetan Lamaism, yoga, the doctrine of assorted swamis, and Atlantis mythology. There you go. The watering down, the wilderness of the mind, the lostness of the mind. Basically, putting together all of these esoteric ideas will weaken Christianity and eventually destroy it. So what they're doing is they're doing it by the back door. They're not saying, oh no, we're going to destroy Christianity. We're going to say, well, we're going to absorb all the world's religions. the usual New Age melting pot of mindful wilderness. Why would a billionaire like Strong, a deputy director of the UN and advisor to the World Bank, a serious international player, devote masses of time and money to religious activities? That would strike many people as ludicrous. If you're going to destroy Western culture, Tom DeWeese said, you first have to get rid of Christianity. Everything of value in Western culture springs from Christianity. I once heard Maurice Strong talk about a novel he'd like to write someday, about the collapse of the industrialised nations, and he said, isn't it our job to bring that about? He actually did say that in one of the conferences which ran up to Rio. I think it was after the 1987 World Wilderness Congress. In those conferences that followed them, because there's quite a lot of these. So Tom DeWeese in this article asks, but why? What drives the man to want to restructure the whole world according to a system, communism, that has already failed? Well, Henry Lamb, in this article, had an answer. People like Maurice Strong advocate radical programs because they hope to use the UN to benefit their financial institutions. Well, that's exactly what we've been saying in this show, isn't it? Spot on. For instance, had they been able to get the world to sign on to the Kyoto Accords, companies like Enron would have made untold zillions of dollars with natural gas in India, with various emissions trading schemes. This is actually what is going to be the result of what happens in Gaza. This is what is going on in Ukraine. It's all about theft of the natural resources. So see the man who saw the future to download that Rothschild trading emissions document from 2008, which stated that the City of London would be the new carbon trading capital. So, the Kyoto Treaty, which was actually rejected by the US Senate in July 2000, would have exempted developing countries like India from restrictions on industrial emissions, while severely limiting emissions in developed countries like the US, which is, of course, is now what has happened. China and India can pollute as much as they want if they invest in the Rothschild and World Bank carbon trading offset schemes. And of course, China just does what it wants anyway. And this is the thing about sustainable development. It's a front. People do not adhere at the top level, at the real pollution level, to any of this. Well, UK was the most strict adherent and signed for the Climate Change Act in 2008. India could then trade some of its emissions allowance to the US, of course, a plan which Enron hoped to recoup its catastrophic losses through at the time. It's complicated, but the basic principle is simple. Maurice Strong and his friends come out on top, Mr. Lamb said. That's what we've been saying all the way through. When you watch these people, you have to follow the money. They always find their way to the money. The next question that arises is governance or government. What gets me is that we do this voluntarily, Tom DeWeese said. We could stop it. The president could stop it any time. But we are voluntarily handing over our sovereignty to the UN. They're coming out of the UN and NGOs with new regulations on the environment, law of the sea, water management. Well, I mean, go back a few years, Wild 11 was in 2021. They did it online, I think, because of COVID. Well, that saw half the world's oceans come under UN control. We, on the other side of the pond, have actually been saying this too, as well as people like Tom DeWeese, for the last 15 years or more. And at some points, I get fed up with it, but really, it underpins pretty much everything. So we have to keep going back to it, and I hope you've got a lot out of this. So this new religion of the climate is now in all schools. It is represented by every government official and politician through the 17 goals of sustainable development, Maurice Strong's looting plan for the world. And Maurice Strong had taken pains not to use words like world government, by the way. But his work as overseer of the UN's internal reforms showed that his word selection didn't match his thinking. They won't say world government, but they're talking about a global tax, a standing UN military force, abolishing the veto power of permanent members of the Security Council, including the US, and global regulations that would apply to building and land use at the local level. Remember, this was all pre-COVID. This is years ago. And we saw the UN global governance system and its linked up agencies during that COVID period. We saw how the World Health Organization worked, and of course all this came out of previous documents. There's a document that we have actually posted, and it was called A Safer Future from 2007, described exactly what happened during the COVID era. It was all planned beforehand, and that was all about what they were going to do during pandemics and how pandemics were going to be used to bring countries into compliance. So, if we give them all those things, all this power that we've been talking about, he says it doesn't matter what they call it, it's world government. The job is pretty complete, and still the public will say global governance is a conspiracy theory, whilst using the words of the creators of this cult in their everyday conversations. This is communitarianism, the common good imposed from above under a scheme based on materialistic atheism but masquerading as an earth religion for the bank, and whose deluded, bloated liars are also known as the Sons of Cain or Luciferians. Remember, of course, the Lucis Trust has seats at the UN, and the UN often opens with the invocation of light. If you want to read UN word salad mixed with hopeless New Age crap, which came out of Alice Bailey originally, take a look at the latest Lucis Trust documents on their website. It is incredible. They have mixed the words of these globalists in with their own cult, their own Luciferian cult, and the rubbish that Alice Bailey spouted, which was of course espoused later by people like David Icke. So, the world has been conned like never before, and all on the back of a new form of original sin based on the lies of bankers and corporate financial greed. Isn't it a good job, dear listener, that you never fell for it? Congratulations on that, and try and keep your sanity. And remember, you can get round anything that they're doing because there is nothing complicated going on here whatsoever. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That was well over an hour. I think we're up to an hour and 18 minutes. For those who want the information, it is there. And for those who don't, well, they only have themselves to blame. So, do support the show. See you next time on Windows on the World.